2.
Chris, you rolled a 2. The topic we'll be discussing today is, how do you design your sessions to give players opportunities to show off?
Ooh, players are supposed to show off?
Yeah, I was going to say, I look forward to learning what this means.
Hello and welcome to Roll for Topic, a roundtable discussion about topics related to running role-playing games. I'm Chris Salzman.
And I'm Andy Rao.
And this week, right, we rolled on our table, and I really like this topic a lot, and I'm excited to talk about it. But before we get into all that, Andy, there's something that I wanted to bring up. I'm going to call you out, but I'm going to call me out too on this. Right. So I don't think either of us have actually run a game in a while. And for those who are listening outside of maybe like our normal release schedule, so we're still smack dab in the middle of a pandemic. The school year is about to start, or has started, for all of us as well. So it's a little bit of a busy time in our lives, but gaming just doesn't seem to really be a part of that these days.
And if you're listening and it's the year like 2038 and there's still a pandemic, I guess I'm just really sorry. If you could come back in time and let us know or something.
It's probably our fault. So
yes.
But so I wanted to bring this up because it's something that I've been thinking about actually just quite a bit, is like there is this part of my life that I feel like I'm not really getting to do, which that's true for a lot of us during the pandemic. But, especially since we have a podcast that's nominally about, how to run these things, not getting the chance to run them is a little demoralizing, at least. So a couple of weeks ago at my office, we did a virtual hangout session where we ended up actually playing a board game, which was just amazing, right? It was the first game that I'd played in a little bit. Like, I also have a 3.5 month old at home as well, so that complicates matters as well. But just getting a chance to even like play a game was really great and reminded me like, oh yes, I need to make this a part of my life in some way. So I'm curious, I guess, like, when's the last time you've run a game?
It's funny because before we met up to do the recording, this has been on my mind quite a bit, especially in the last week. It just seems to have kind of come home for some reason. But It's been like a full 2 months since I've run a role-playing game. And even back then it was running stuff for like my kids, which is still, that's a real gaming experience, but it is a pretty far cry from, getting together with the usual gang and, spending a couple of hours on a Friday night or whatever playing. So It has been a couple of months, and you said demoralizing, which is exactly what it is. I go by the game shelf and I see these books and I want to run them, and I flip through it. I've been reading a couple of them, but I know that people are making really good use of the online format for playing games, and that's fantastic, but I don't know. I guess my enthusiasm level for that is fairly low. But I don't know how else to kind of get things going again. And I guess like lately I've been thinking about sending an email to the D&D group saying, hey, can we figure something out? And I don't know if that means just we all have masks or we have to play out on the back porch in the open air or what. But I don't know. Something's got to change.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that backyard thing as well. So my wife had some of her friends over a month ago or so, and they all brought card tables, and so they just set them up in the backyard. So they were 10 feet apart from everybody, but there's 5 or 6 of them back there.
Yeah,
and it worked out pretty well, right? I'm lucky to have a backyard that we can do that, and especially with the weather turning, it's not as hot and all that. So I'm really giving some serious thought to rounding up a couple of people and just saying like, come on over, let's just do a one shot or something like that, and seeing if that can work well. Sitting that far apart. For me, part of like playing games is the sitting around the table aspect of it, and really sort of sharing that communal experience like in the same space as each other. So like online's fine, but I would rather do it in person. So if there's some way to make it happen outside, I think that'd be great.
One of the things that's a little unfortunate is the games I'm most interested in playing or running right now have some sort of physical element to them that makes playing at the table just a much more appealing prospect. Like, they use special dice with cool symbols on them that you piece together, or they have some sort of gameplay element that really calls for being at the table with people. I mean, I suppose I could just not play those games, which is certainly always an option. But with Halloween coming up, I have been thinking a lot. I really don't like to let Halloween go by without running something. doing
Ooh, yeah.
some sort of Halloween game, even if it's not really a horror game, although it might be. So I've just been thinking about that, and by then it'll be too cold here in the Midwest to play out in the backyard, probably.
Maybe. Yeah, I don't know. We're quickly running out of time for that. Yeah, the one thing that I've been thinking about is doing something thematic with like a fire pit involved in the middle of the play session as well, because then you could have that built-in warmth, and then especially with Halloween, right, there's a ton of things you could do with the fire pit as the centerpiece. But I mean, I think you bring up a really good point that often having that shared, even just physical space where you can all be looking at the same thing is helpful for games. So if you remove that, right, you got to play Theater of the Mind or play just different games entirely. Do you have a game that you're thinking you might run this Halloween, or are you still on the lookout for it?
Well, the game that I am most interested in running this Halloween is the Alien role-playing game. And that falls into the category of I feel like it will work a lot better in person. It uses dice with cool symbols on it. There are like playing cards involved. There are playing cards and stuff involved. Not so much that you couldn't run it online, but it's cool. It seems like it would add to the experience. I guess I'd rather have my first experience with the Alien RPG be one where we use all of the doodads that come with it. So
of course,
I would love to run a game of Alien over Halloween, and I have a number of friends I think that would be into that. It's just a matter of figuring out how to make it work.
Yeah.
How about you? Is Halloween gaming on your radar? Or, I mean, do you think of Halloween as like, ooh, Halloween, it's time for the annual Halloween game?
A little bit. I've run a couple of Halloween specific games, and they've always been fun, at least for me. I think for players as well. I did a Kids on Bikes. That was a really fun Halloween game to play. I don't know, like the more that I think about it, I think I do want to try something for that. And it'd be nice. It's nice to have sort of these holidays that you can center stuff around too, I think, because then people are a little bit more open to just like, oh, I'll just come and try that one shot or whatever for it. So I think I might have to plan just like a D&D one shot that can work well as a Halloween game in the backyard. Maybe just like get the people together and then figure out what it's going to be after the fact, rather than trying to get the perfect plan together. Because I think with anything, right, like whenever you invite people over to your house to play a game anyway, it's a little bit of a crapshoot. Like, well, is this going to work? If people have to cancel all that, right? But I think especially if you're adding in the mix of like, well, if it's going to rain, then we have to reschedule, those sorts of things. Too. It's just a different consideration.
Yeah, my backup choice for Halloween would be just D&D, and that's something I feel I would be able to run online okay. But I guess I'll throw out a recommendation to you that you consider The Curse of Strahd as
ooh, okay.
I mean, it's a good Halloween themed thing, but more importantly, it's easily breakable down into like one shots. Like there's a bunch of different encounters of varying levels, and if you have a copy of the book or if you're able to get access to it, it's pretty good. If you don't want to roll your own, D&D thing. So.
That's really good to know. Yeah, I think I assumed that you had to run the whole campaign, but is there? I mean, I know there's like the Death House at the beginning, which I've heard mixed reviews on.
Yeah.
But then are there other sections of that can be run?
Yeah, well, it's more of I guess what you call a sandbox than some of the other published 5e campaigns are. So there's kind of a script, the kind of canned adventure at the beginning to drop you into the horror realm. And then Strahd's Castle is kind of a very large adventure location, but in between there's a lot of stuff that you can just encounter if you go to the right place, and those are the sorts of things you could pull out, I think, for one shot. You could so Strahd's Castle would work pretty well for like repeated forays into it. So you could even, if you wanted to roll up some maybe medium or higher level characters, you could do like a raid on Strahd's Castle, which would not give players time or the opportunity, to explore it in depth. But if the purpose of it is to go in quick and get out before Strahd, finds you, that could make a pretty tense Halloween game, I think.
Yeah, go like steal his heart that's located in some treasure chest somewhere.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what we both really want is just a Castlevania one shot.
Yes, you read my mind.
Yeah.
Yes. Good times.
All right, well, let's dive into our topic. Thank you for for admitting that we haven't played a game in a while on air. But maybe we'll go back and we'll change it. And it's been 1 week and I feel bad.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. Yeah, so the topic we rolled was, how do you design your sessions to give players opportunities to show off? And I think this is a really good, I think like a good topic for Roll for Topic, right? Because I think all the GMs that we've had on, I think we also fall into this category. We're not combative GMs, like, right? Like, we're not trying to win D&D. We're not trying to, beat the players, that sort of things. Like, when we're sitting down to play, I think like we're coming from the default assumption of we're having a shared sort of fun narrative that's happening no matter what the session is, what the game is. So to that end, right, you can design your sessions to give players these interesting ways to show off and, show off their characters and those sorts of things. So, all that to say, do you have anything that you're thinking about immediately, like any kind of story about a chance that you gave a player?
Well, I hope that I don't rain on this parade right up front here, but this is an interesting topic. But it's partly interesting to me because I don't really think about this in the way that this topic has it worded. The idea of like players showing off, allow me to put on my like old school hat. It's not an idea that was expressed in that way for an awful lot of like D&D's history, for example. It's not that when I'm designing an encounter, I'm not giving some thought to how will the features of this encounter interact with the abilities and the characteristics of the players. It's not that I don't think about that, but I have to say I don't really think, how can I design this in such a way to make sure that players can really, show off. Again, I don't think I disagree or have a problem with this in any fundamental way, but let's talk about it a bit. What do you hear when you hear the words players showing off?
Yeah, when I think about that, I think about giving players just the chance to use the things that make their characters unique. So, for example, if you have someone in your group that's an archer, this means that you occasionally have an enemy in there that like can only be hit with a bow and arrow.
Yep.
That sort of thing. Like, it's got to be a ranged attack because it's flying around really fast. So those are the sorts of things that I'm thinking about, like when you're designing encounters or even just like, designing locations and things like that is like, or like, a magic item that they have in their inventory that they've been thinking about and asking about. It's like, okay, like, let's just make sure that there's a way for them to use that in this area.
Well, I can't say that I think too much about that.
Okay.
Which,
this is great then. Okay. Yeah. So why don't you think about that?
So when I'm building encounters, this is maybe the old school D&D Rollmaster person. Actually probably comes more from having my formative gaming be in the old Middle Earth game. When I am designing an encounter and adventure, foremost in my mind is what is the most likely or quote realistic or the most appropriate way for this situation to have been set up by the people running it or living in it. So let's say we have a network of caves that like we have a network of caves that the orcs live in, right? And the players are going to go in there. I don't at least consciously think, what can I put in here in this cave system that will let players like use their special abilities or their powers or whatever like that. I tend to think, how would the orcs set up this environment, maybe with the knowledge that roving adventurers will occasionally try to smash the door down and come in. And players do end up showing off, but it tends to be more in finding unexpected ways to use their defining powers, rather than having a scene given to them that I guess calls out to them to use those powers. Yeah. So I hope I'm not mischaracterizing what you say. I'm not saying that you would spoon feed, players these scenarios that they don't have, that there's one obvious solution to. But that's how I approach it, I guess. So how by contrast do you set up an encounter? Say you're doing a network of caves with some orcs in it. What do you start thinking about?
Just as a tangent, I'm thinking about like Dr. Wily from the Mega Man games and how all those stages are designed to both challenge Mega Man but allow him to get through it. Yeah. Right? Like, he Flash Man or like D&D Man or whatever could have his stage just be a bunch of spikes that Mega Man could not make his way across. But instead there's these like perfectly, positioned platforms and things like that he can make his way through and just, decimate the army and go and defeat the Robot Master.
Yes.
Those sorts of things. But I mean, I would say listening to you talk about the history of it a little bit, I am wondering if this is more of a video gamey thing, right? Because video games definitely do play a bit with that power fantasy of like, well, you have a shield bash and just, you know, all these enemies, they can all be hit by a shield bash, you know, those sorts of things, where there's very much a one-to-one of like, you have this ability and this is the problem that you can solve with that ability, right? Like, and you're just going back and forth like that quite a bit. So I'm wondering if that's one of those things that has bled back over into sort of modern D&D, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking of video games even while we were chatting. I mean, the downside of it is, and maybe you've played video games where this has happened, if you put all your points into the shield bash skill for your character, and then the whole next section of the game has like all enemies that does nothing. Then you sort of hate the game and yourself, and I mean, in a role-playing game there's maybe more opportunities to salvage a situation like that than in like a video game. But your point is taken, and I was kind of thinking about this in terms of video games too. If I can make some generalizations here, it feels to me like the difference a bit between like a game where you're in a video game and, you know, it's like press X to use your cool lightning attack, versus a game that sets out a scene with no special consideration as to what you're bringing to it. My ideal is kind of the Skyrim, Fallout, open world type games where the memorable gameplay experiences come from there not being a particular approach that is really rewarded, but rather making it as open as possible for players to just creatively use their skills and talents to crack it open. I realize I'm making kind of an unfair contrast, because I don't think you were suggesting that in D&D you do the like, okay, now everyone press X to use your lightning power and you win. You know, I'm not saying that's how it goes, but.
Yeah, I think maybe a little bit of a corollary to this, and I totally get what you're saying, is like you're not, it sounds like you're not designing your encounters with specific solutions in mind, like necessarily, and then you're allowing yourself to be surprised by what the player has come up with. I think something that's related to this, and this is actually another topic on the table that I just sort of glanced at, but is the rule of cool, right? Is this sort of concept of, well, like, oh, that's a really neat idea that could really play well into your character concept and all that. And maybe like there isn't exactly a ruling in the Dungeon Master's Guide for this, but let's just go ahead and you can try it. You know, that sort of thing, because it's just like, oh, well, that would be very fun. That'd be very cool if this actually happened. Yeah. If you did do that crazy trick shot where you bounce the arrow off of a corner and like it went through 2 orcs at the same time. But going back to like a question that you asked me a little bit, like, so how would I design a session like that? I think for me, this often comes across a little bit more in role-playing specific encounters rather than combat ones. And like we've talked about at length, like I'm not great at running combat, but like I feel like I have a little bit of a better handle on the role-playing parts of it. But like what I will often do, and this I think is a really simple way, is like within shops and stuff, you have items that are tantalizing to specific players because you sort of know their play style and you know that they might be really interested in this sort of thing to amplify their character's personality. And so an item that I have just like love putting in front of certain players is the Cloak of Billowing from 5e. So it's just a very dumb little cloak. You snap your fingers and it billows behind you. You snap again and it stops billowing. And like for certain players, like that just completes their character concept. If they can just get that cloak, like it's great and they can use it all the time and it's like super fun, right? And that's an opportunity to allow them to kind of show off. That's a very minor example.
Yeah, you know, and there's another level on which I think even the most cranky old schooler like myself is definitely trying to give players the opportunity to show off, even if we're not saying it in exactly those words.
Yeah.
And that is like kind of on the more meta scale, like how you just design the general types of adventure and the general themes of the campaign. I mean, if half of your players have designed rangers and druids and woodland people, and then you don't let them play in those kinds of environments that are favorable to their characters, I mean, sure, you could still have fun, but why are you doing that? And you probably should have told them this is a city campaign and you won't see a piece of greenery throughout this entire campaign. So, I mean, there's certainly times, whether you call it letting your players show off or just taking the obvious cues of the kind of game and the kind of encounters and the kind of, situations players want to be in, and molding your campaign, at least bending your campaign in that direction, even if you don't overhaul it completely in response to player interests. I think everyone does that. And if you don't, I guess I hope you're having fun. But your players might be a little annoyed with you, but
yeah, you might want to have a serious conversation with them. Yeah, this would remind me. It's something that I used to do. I haven't done it in a while. I called them. I came up with a cheesy name for it. It was like level 3 stories or something like that. So when players would hit level 3, which in 5e that's sort of like a big transition point in character classes and stuff.
Yeah.
When they'd hit level 3, I would try to design a little encounter or a little something that would allow them to use their new abilities or spells or something like that. So like I had a rogue. I think it was my wife was playing a rogue who just got the second story work ability, right, which allows them to climb up, like essentially like they can climb up buildings as well as they can walk. I designed like a little thing where she could climb a tree to save someone.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. Right? I had another wizard who got I think like burning hands at at level 3, and like the first time that he used it, it just like it erupted and like got used at like at like a 5th level spell instead, because it was like the first time you use it, like you have no control over it whatsoever, and it like wipes out half the forest. Those sorts of things where it's like, it doesn't really matter like kind of long term to the story, but it allows them to get a sense of like, wow, like I really had this change that happened to my character. It can now do this thing that it couldn't do before.
Do you play any games? Did you run any games of the sort that let players like introduce elements to a scene or just define elements of an encounter? I ask because in games like that, some of that expectation of like show off is put on the players, I feel, where they have more power to say, hey, here's this like scene that doesn't particularly give my character any particular advantage, but I'm going to use whatever it is, my fate points or my narrative interrupt or whatever the game mechanic of it is, to introduce a scene that sets me up to do something cool. Do you play games like that?
Yeah, I would say like Blades in the Dark falls under that. It's been, goodness, like 5 episodes, I think, since we've mentioned Blades in the Dark.
I know, yeah. All right, let's just say it again. Blades in the Dark, Blades in the Dark. Right.
Yeah, the thing that I like about Blades is there's a little bit more of a shared narrative there, at least, especially the way that I've run it. It's a lot more improv heavy. It's a lot more like, well, is there a window here? It's like, yes, of course there's a window there. That sort of thing.
Yeah.
Like with D&D, you might have mapped out the scenario a little bit more tightly. With Blades, you could have a much more loose concept of what's going on. Sort of come up with it together based on what the players think they need at one point or another. And I like that style of game quite a bit. I think I'm sort of forever wishing that I could find a way to play D&D in that style.
Yeah.
I have some good ideas for how I can make that happen that maybe I'll actually get to try sometime. But yeah. What about you? Have you played mini games that way?
Yeah, some. I really enjoy this, and like you, I often, after playing a game like Blades in the Dark, like when we played Blades in the Dark, like I walked away from that not saying Blades in the Dark is the best, I'm gonna switch over to and play only Blades in the Dark forever. When instead my takeaway was, there's so much cool stuff in there. I kind of like my D&D, but I sure wish I could haul some of the stuff from Blades of the Dark over into my D&D. And that would be one of the big ones, just the flexibility of encounters, which you would think players might try to abuse, but in practice they don't, because players are not here to be jerks, right? Like
and I don't think so.
Like when we played Blades in the Dark, people were asking questions, they were introducing ideas, they were being creative, but not in an abusive way. It was generally in a way that just made the game more interesting and fun. So I have that same sense of wanting to my D&D to be a little bit more like Blades in the Dark.
There's something to what you just said about like, players aren't out to be jerks. Like, like it can sometimes be hard for GMs to sort of give up narrative control and, some mechanical control for the games that they're playing. But like every time that I've posited to players, like, I'm not sure, why don't you tell me that sort of thing? It's usually, it's an additive idea, right? It's rarely like oh, well, I mean, if you're going to give me any sort of control, then like that big bad guy dies and I get to level 20 immediately. Yes. Right? Like no one's doing that. Like they also want to, to make it sort of interesting and unique. Maybe it's because we play with like adults, but
yeah, I'm sure that's actually is a big part of it. Okay. I'm just trying to remember my junior high school games, and you might have gotten more of that sort of abuse behavior. But so I wanted to ask, why is it fun for players to quote show off? Like, what is the experience that you are trying to bring about? So, one way or the other, the players are going to get through the encounter you're building for them, right?
Yeah.
So, what does it add to the game to put in, opportunities for them to quote show off? Like, what do you want the players to feel, and what do you see them feeling when they when they have a power that just is perfect for the situation?
What I see is this sense of like, oh, it finally worked, right? That moment of like, I've had this idea of what I want this character to be able to do, and like it finally, everything came together, and I was able to do it. And that is just a really powerful experience. I mean, I think for like you've played Magic the Gathering, something that would happen to me a lot when I was younger, and would still happen if I played Magic now, but like when I was younger, is I would get a card and I would get so fixated on like, I need to find a way to get this card out into play. It was often, a card that just made no sense, right? Like, so any of the ancient dragons from like the legendary set, those were the sorts of things where it's like, you're probably not going to get this card out because, it takes all sorts of different mana and you have to draw it at the, right time. But then when you could play a game and you get it out and it's like, I'm going to win because I got this thing out. Like, this is the best. It finally worked. Like this whole deck that I tuned to make this happen, it's finally happening. So I think like that sensation happens at, the role-playing game table as well, when you're like, oh, like I have this cool ability and I've just been trying to find a way to use it, or you just remember it because there's a situation happening and you're looking at your character sheet like, oh, I have that thing. I do have second story work. I can climb up there.
Yeah.
Those sorts of things. It's a really fun feeling of being able to pull off something that just seems maybe a little bit abnormal from your normal session.
That makes sense. And along those lines, there is this tendency in a lot of the games I play to downplay the mechanics of the game. And generally speaking, that's a fine thing, right? It's fine not to be always referring to rules and stuff, but I find it satisfying, and in my experience, I think players find it satisfying when you are prompted to employ the game's mechanics in a way that, serve the story and advance the encounter, and that lets you do something cool. Now that I think about it, an encounter designed to be open to particular player powers would be kind of a way to remind everyone, hey, don't forget we're playing a game. So remember to take a look at your character sheet and think through what you can do with these game mechanics to have a cool effect in like the game world. You know what I mean? Otherwise, everyone ends up just kind of swinging. Sometimes, do you ever have it where even players with like a fairly wide range of abilities just end up just swinging their sword every round? And so
that makes me feel like a failure when that happens. It's like, oh, I didn't give you something else to grab onto.
Yeah.
It's just like you're just going to try the same thing again.
Yeah, it's like a bummer, and you can see how boring it is. Like, I mean, not that people are not having any fun at all, but like, there is definitely that point in a lot of like, happens a lot in combat where it's like, oh, I guess I'll just swing my sword. And whenever someone says something like that, it's always like, oh man, the most interesting thing they could think of to do with their character was just to stand there and swing their sword again. Like, what has gone wrong here, And so maybe more intentional design of encounters to be like exploitable by certain mechanics is a way to not only let players show off, but also to kind of get everybody a little bit more involved in like the gaminess of what we're doing.
That's a good way to put it. Well, we should wrap up our conversation. We've been going for about a half an hour. This is really good. This is giving me actually a lot to think about. I think I went into this thinking that, oh, I know how to do this, but now I'm like, oh, I did not know how to do this.
Well,
I just really love what you said about kind of that like the mechanics supporting it as well. Like, and I think about like the cool times where the roll has gone exactly right, and it's like, oh, that was good because we weren't just like spitballing just to let it happen. Like, it happened sort of like within the shared agreement of the game.
Yeah.
Yeah, before we go, I guess, is there anything that you have been watching or reading that you wanted to talk about real quick just before we wrap up?
Just over the last couple of years, I've been reading the Expanse novels. Have you heard of those?
I think so. Isn't there's a TV show?
There's a TV show. I've not seen it. They're based on books. And these novels either are based on or kind of had their origin in a role-playing game. Pretty sure of that. It's and I don't like love them. Like they belong to that category of book that like I always enjoy reading them. Like I always enjoy picking up the next book in the series, but I'm never in like a hurry to read the next one, you know? I always enjoy it and put it down. It's like, this is great. In like 5 months, I'm going to be just in the mood for this again, and I'll read the next book. And that series is a very gamey, inspiring one, which, by the way, has been combining with my lack of gaming to just maximize what you call the demoralization. But so if I can go off on a quick tangent here, what this has got me consciously thinking about. So like whenever I read books like this, at least part of my brain is always like, oh, wonder what it would be like to run a game in this setting, right? And so The Expanse is like this very space opera setting. Whatever you thought of when I said the word space opera, it is in these books. So, and it got me thinking about settings that really seem to invite making them game environments, and settings that no matter how cool they are, just don't like really seem to be asking to be played in. While I've been reading these, the trailer for the new Dune movie came out. The trailer looks fantastic. Like, Dune is an example of a setting. I know there is a role-playing game coming out set in Dune, and there was one sort of little blip of an attempt by Wizards of the Coast to do a Dune RPG many years ago. But Dune is like a setting. It's an amazing setting. It's imaginative. It's interesting. But like if you said, Andy, I'm going to run a Dune role-playing game, like
Nope.
roll, like I would be like, I don't know. Like I would struggle. Like what would I do in this universe? And reading The Expanse, which is this very gamey setting, and then seeing the Dune trailer, which is to me holds very little like role-playing like appeal to me. I don't know. I guess I'm asking a question. I don't have an answer, but I've been trying to figure out what it is about settings that make them the sort of thing you want to explore through the medium of a game versus settings that like you enjoy and appreciate, but they really just belong best in their original medium. That was, I'm sorry for the very wordy response. You're probably just hoping I'd say like, oh, I'm rereading Lord of the Rings or something.
Yeah, I was really looking for that, but instead this very philosophical question, which is a good one, but yeah.
So and I realize we need to wrap up here, but let me sum that all up with a quick question. I'm curious, is there like a particular setting or a franchise or books or movies that you love that you just could never imagine like running a game in?
Oh goodness.
Or one that like seems so insanely gameable, you don't know why it's not a popular role-playing game.
Yeah, I mean, Dune is such a good example of something that I could not imagine playing a role-playing game in it, because like I need to reread that book, but my main memory of it is like, you have sort of an entitled prince. There's a bunch of like dining room scenes where there's a lot of like psychological stuff happening, and then there's like out in the desert with sandworms and then huge battles and stuff. It's just the sort of thing like I don't know how you could have an individual person who could have any sort of effect on that unless you are some sort of demigod.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Well, think about compare it to like Star Wars. So what is it about like Star Wars? Star Wars is a very gameable setting, and there's been many successful role-playing games set in the Star Wars universe. What is it about Star Wars where you watch it and you're like, oh man, there's so many stories to be told in this universe besides the main plot line. I can't wait to get out my game books. But you read Dune, which is also a really big setting with lots of factions and aliens and machinations. and yet you don't. And no one is like, oh, I've got to write this up for D&D.
Yeah. As you were talking, I remembered like we watched an episode of The Expanse and liked it quite a bit. It just we had a baby at the time, right? So it was hard to get into anything.
Yeah.
But like there's something about the density of normal people, going back to what I was saying in both Star Wars and The Expanse and some of these other settings that makes it where you could see yourself fitting in there and blending in outside of the heroes. So, like, with the Middle Earth game, for example, like, thinking about Lord of the Rings, like, it'd be hard to envision yourself being, like, Aragorn playing in a role-playing game in a Lord of the Rings Middle Earth style setting. But, like, you could see yourself being, like, a hobbit, you know, like, on the side, that sort of thing. Like, yeah, so I think there's got to be something to, like, the ability for, like, a normal person to exist and have agency in those worlds to be able to see yourself in them as well.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Yeah, I mean, do you ever meet, like a bartender in the Dune universe, you know, or just a regular person?
Yeah.
Like, you know, everybody is, like, the fated scion of some kind of legacy, right?
Yeah, the bartender would be there to, like, die because it had to teach Paul some sort of lesson.
That's right, yes.
Right? Yeah.
All right, well, I'm very sorry for hijacking your innocent softball question and getting all weird with it. Can I...
No, that was good.
Now, having done that, can I turn that around and ask, have you been watching, reading, listening to anything gamey lately?
Yeah, so two things. We started Lovecraft Country, which is just phenomenal.
Oh, good. I haven't started it yet, but I can't wait. I can't wait.
Yeah, it's good. We're, again, babies, so we're only one episode in, but we'll get caught up. It's great. I loved that novel, and I think this adaptation is probably going to be better than the novel.
I can see that. I love the book too, and I could see a good film version actually being a better way to tell the story.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, like, Matt Ruff, I think that's his name, the author, is great. He's also white. I think the direction that they're taking with at least the TV show, I think a lot of the creative people behind it are actually black. So I think there's just sort of a better sense of what the story can kind of mean that's coming across. Yeah, so it's fantastic. So that's really good. And then the other show that we've been watching a lot is, it's called Taskmaster. So it's this British panel TV show.
Never heard of it.
You might like it.
Okay.
You might not. I don't know. It's two comedians who are one's the taskmaster and one's the assistant, and they set these really weird tasks for a bunch of other comedians to do. So it'll be stuff like, you know, take this bowl of lemons and stack them up as tall as you can. You have 30 seconds. Your time starts now. Right. And so then you watch these comedians separately try to figure out a way to stack up lemons. You know, and it's like these really just sort of like fun challenges that you watch and you're like, oh, I could do that. Like, I could totally do that. You know, like, yeah, so it has that good sense of like you yelling at the TV, but then it's also, you know, delightful comedians, you know, doing these ridiculous tasks as well.
Have you seen videos of like some of these ridiculous like Japanese game shows?
Yeah.
I feel like
it's very similar to
Western media is slowly just catching up to Japan as far as like what makes for compelling TV.
Yeah. So we've been watching a lot of Taskmaster because it's kind of the perfect, like, you can kind of half watch it show while you're tending to a baby. But the thing that I really like about it and that I've been thinking about it in terms of games is just like how low the stakes have to be for people to get invested in a problem or a puzzle, right? Like, you don't have to give people much other than a little bit of competition for them to just like, yes, I need to figure out a way to throw that potato in that hole. Like, you know, yeah, or to, like make the biggest explosion, or like, you know, these sorts of things that are just like, they're ridiculous, but like you give a little bit of meat to it and people want to try it. So
I decided I needed to watch this show, and it's because you mentioned figuring out how to throw a potato in the hole. Like, so that just sold me. Like, I'm going to stop recording here in a second, and I'm going to Google how I can watch it.
Track it down. Yeah, it's really good. I would recommend it to anyone who likes like British comedy, right? Like, so you can kind of self-select there pretty easily.
So are you going to, the real question is, are there any challenges in there that you are going to like thinly disguise and just plop into a D&D game?
Probably. There is a non-zero chance I will run a Taskmaster based one shot at some point, just because it's too much fun.
Yes, that sounds great.
Yeah.
The wizard will surrender, but only if you can get this potato into that hole.
No, it won't even be that. It'll be more like the wizard has summoned you to this competition. Yeah.
I think I know what both of us are going to wind up running for Halloween, whether we want to.
Yes.
Or not,
right? Yeah. Yes. A fun house of terrible challenges.
Okay. Well, we do need to wrap up here.
Yeah.
But Chris, it's been really fun discussing this with you, and I hope for both of our sakes that we can get a little bit of gaming going in some way, shape, or form in the next couple of weeks. So we can check in 2 weeks and see how each of us is progressing along that quest. But
the silence will be deafening if there's no progress.
Yeah, if we don't mention it, just you'll have your answer, dear listeners.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all for listening. We really appreciate it. Yeah, if you are listening and you want to reach out, please do. We love to hear from people. It makes our day. So, yeah, I've been Chris Salzman.
I've been Andy Rao.
And remember, if your players are having fun, you're a great GM.